Nicholas Pegues reporting here with Shelby County Commissioner Heidi Schaefer, and I received um, a booklet from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II regarding her Diamond Jubilee. And could you please express your support for Queen Elizabeth II regarding this booklet and her Diamond Jubilee? And could you please show to the international community what she extended to me, Commissioner Schaefer?
Well, I just thought this was very lovely. It's the program from her Diamond Jubilee, and you can see it's Elizabeth II, and I believe the R stands for Rex. She began her reign in 1952, and it shows that her Diamond Jubilee is in 2012. And if you open it up, you see her on her coronation day, and some pictures throughout the years. And there she is in her royal regalia. And it's from Buckingham Palace, and it says, "I send you my grateful thanks for the words of support which you have so kindly sent on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of my accession to the throne. Elizabeth, 2012.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Heidi Schaefer. And, it was a complete honor to receive this from Queen Elizabeth II, and it was just amazing to me. So, as the youngest Shelby County Unified School Board applicant, I'm just honored, and I will continue to fight and help my generation to be inspired in public service.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. And happy 2012 Diamond Jubilee to Her Majesty. Nicholas Pegues reporting here in Memphis, Tennessee, a Victorian village here in the city of Memphis, where I just attended church today. First African American church established here in Victorian Village. And here is part of my documentary, for CNN Our Report. Here are some of the historic homes of Victorian Village here in Memphis, Tennessee. Very interesting. Nicholas Pegues reporting. Promoting and educating the international community about Memphis and its historic history. And here's the house that I'm going to tour today. The CNN Our Reporter, called the Woodruff Fonte House and Museum. Let's go in and tour it. Nicholas Pegues reporting. Here at Victorian Village. Let's forget CNN Our Reporter Memphis.
This is chamber pot against the wall. When there was no indoor plumbing, chamber pot was used in the evening. Oh, I do too. Snakes out there, no
Nicholas Pegues reporting.
but it did not have indoor plumbing until, surely
And I have a question. The church I go to is across the street. The church I attend is across the street, Collins Chapel. Was that church established when this house was built? Was the church already?
I think this is older.
This is older.
You should research that. You should go to church.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. It was like 1859.
Your church?
Uh huh.
Oh, then your church is older. Your church
Yeah,
is,
1859.
your church is probably about like a Maryland Union time period.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but this is 1871.
So this house was here when that church was built.
You were first.
We were first.
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't know that. Wow. It is. Is it ever open for tourists? Because I know they do tours.
Nicholas Pegues reporting.
And that one died. We think she comes back here because this was where she was first happy, where she grew up, where she was happy. The first indications that I know of her presence were sounds of weeping that some of our docents heard from different parts of the house, particularly if they were on the first floor, they would hear a weeping sound from the second floor. Many people who've come through have had experiences. We've had young women that I sort of say, well, it was a hysteric. One came through one day and Jean was taking her through and she was walking around with her shoes off upstairs and she turned to Jean and said, I can't leave this room, she's in here. And Jean said, oh, come on, let's go. No, she's standing in front of me. My bangs are, can't you see my bangs moving? Well, they were sort of moving, as though they were being ruffled.
Dust, mud, flies, and mosquitoes, the bane of city life. And Memphis had it all. City fathers wrestled with these problems with mixed results for decades.
It is probably impossible to describe how muddy and dirty the city of Memphis was at the beginning. The problem was obvious to everyone that when they crossed from one side of the street to another, they had to wear boots. They're covered with mud. Their clothing would be muddy, and in really dry weather, clouds of dust. How to deal with this was the problem, and there was no good answer to it.
This street would have been dust or mud, depending on the weather. We have 2 chairs here in the front that have lift seats, and they put brushes in there. And they'd brush their clothes and the hems when they came in off the street. The women wore, of course, floor-length dresses just above the ankle, which collected all the street mud and dust. And so they would take cotton snakes, as they call them now. They would stuff rolls full of cotton and sew them to the under edge of their dresses. And when they got dirty, they were basted in, and they just pulled them out, put a new one in.
They tried putting water, putting oil on to keep the dust down in bad weather. And they also adopted for a while something called Nicholson pavement, which was a trade name device of pieces of wood cut to fit together, but they deteriorated, they rotted, and one must remember also that all of the street surfaces were soaked with animal excrement. No diesel fuel fumes or gasoline engines at the time, but a vast amount of excrement from animals of different kinds. And also, it must be remembered that in the early Victorian period, the city of Memphis had very little in the way of garbage collection. It tended to be just simply thrown into the street with the theory that it would mix with the mud and disappear into it, which generally it probably did.
The Memphis newspapers are just notorious about berating the city fathers for the dust in the streets, and if it's raining, it's mud. There's an incidence of a mule drowning in a mud hole down near Poplar and Main Street. And there's also, of course, it's out in a little bit in the county then, but one of the articles deals with a mud hole at the corner of what is now Poplar and Dunlap, and some wild hogs getting after some children that were playing around down there. So they're always needing the city fathers, but we've also got to realize that city government, not only in Memphis, but almost every city in the country, is basically a part-time vocation.
Yellow fever was the scourge of southern cities for decades, and Memphis suffered more than most. Each summer brought death or the threat of death to every citizen, regardless of race, creed, or economic station. In 1878, a yellow fever epidemic nearly destroyed the city. The disease carried by mosquitoes decimated the population with deaths and a mass exodus of citizens. Of the 19,000 who did not or could not flee this worst epidemic, almost 80% contracted the fever and 1/4 died. This single event nearly spelled the end of Memphis.
If you go west from where we're sitting now, you're actually going downhill. And at the bottom of that hill is Danny Thomas Boulevard. Underneath Danny Thomas Boulevard is a big sewer, and at that time it was known as the Gayoso Bayou. If you just travel that, you see that the paving is a meandering, not a laid out line. Well, in the 1878 yellow fever epidemic, the yellow fever epidemic sprang up. They didn't realize it was born by the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is bred in stagnant water, and guess what? The Gayoso Bayou was stagnant water, filth, garbage, pestilence, human waste, dead animals. sitting there at putrefying, breeding these mosquitoes that came up the river from New Orleans.
This section of the city was so devastated that if you didn't die of yellow fever, you left because you didn't want to die, and eventually the city lost its charter, became a taxing district. This was a problem that I don't think any of us can even begin to compare what that constant threat of death must have been like, especially for the Woodruffs when they first moved in here. Here, these people were rewarding themselves with a wonderfully glorious home, and who would have thought that in a period of a short 8 years, their dream just vanished because of this mosquito that came into their lives. I don't think anybody can imagine what that must have been like for the family. And then to have to walk away from it, but they didn't walk too far away from it. They continued to live here in Memphis, but it was a constant reminder of what had happened to their businesses and what had happened to their family members. It must have been a very tragic time for the family.
I think that Gail Sabao was the garbage can for the city, because the drays came by to pick up refuse, and that's where they dumped it, was in the bayou. But dead animals were thrown in there. They had no idea about sanitation, and I think the backup of water probably was one of the reasons they had such bad yellow fever epidemics here, because they had no idea about standing water breeding mosquitoes.
St. Mary's Episcopal Cathedral is closely associated with episodes of martyrdom known throughout the world. When the 1878 epidemic struck, a number of priests and nuns, doctors, and even prostitutes stayed behind to tend to the sick and dying. The Episcopal Nun Superior, Sister Constance, 3 other Episcopal nuns, and 2 Episcopal priests are known throughout the Anglican Communion as Constance and her companions, or the Martyrs of Memphis.
It was a time of great change because it was the yellow fever epidemic that wiped out a large percentage of the population of the city, perhaps 5,500, and that forced people to be more conscious of the need to spend money to establish water systems, to get a sewage system established, to begin to get the streets paved.
I mean, so all of those changes are taking place, a lot of them in the aftermath of yellow fever epidemic, debt crisis, losing the city charter, and then the taxing district, and then when the city is, in a sense, reborn in the late 19th century, it's going to be a different place. If you've ever seen those pictures of the opening of the bridge, you know, that's all of these people just waiting. Who's going to be the first person to take the engine across this bridge? You know, I think a lot of people, because we're so much caught in the present, we don't really have this sense of there not being a bridge between Memphis and Arkansas. It's an exciting period in the late 19th century. It's also a difficult period. You know, you can't really ignore the fact that some of the changes that are taking place, and particularly in terms of race relations, it's a period when, as far as race relations in the city and state and nationally, you've gone from slavery to this change that brings all of this African-American population into the city. They're becoming urban people. You've got the growth of schools, you know, public school systems for African-Americans. That's a positive. You've got African-Americans who are involved in government, on the councils, on the Board of Education, the wharf master, all of these things. In the late 19th century, you know, things start to change racially. Jim Crow segregation comes in. Voting becomes more difficult, but you have people like Julia Hooks. In 1894, you have this, you know, this article in the newspaper where she's organizing this group of women in the aftermath of a lynching in 1894. But she's holding these meetings, and she's telling these women, we have to do whatever we can to make sure that our men pay their poll taxes and vote.
Behind the grand houses of Adams Avenue is a church that has stood since 1859. It is called Collins Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Throughout its history, it has been the spiritual home for thousands of African Americans and a guiding light during trying times.
Somebody said it eloquently, referring to Caesar's law, civil law, governmental law. I swear to the Lord, I still can't see why democracy means everybody but me. And so it was that rejection, that inability to receive fulfillment from the governmental law, even though the Declaration of Independence, Patrick Henry, and all those persons cried out eloquently that all men were created equal. Black Americans were not in fact created equal because, according to the Constitution, they were only 3/5 of a man. And so it was that cruelty, if you will, it was that absolute, unequivocal rejection of African Americans that caused their strength and power in the church. Well, Collins Chapel is a historical religious institution in the city of Memphis. It's 167 years old. It has a very unique founding, having been founded in the basement in 1841 at First United Methodist Church at Poplar and 2nd Street. From that humble beginning in the basement, and the First United Methodist Church was gracious enough to deed Collins Chapel the basement. They actually deeded and bought the basement of the church, which was radical for the times. If in 1841, African Americans, black people, were not able to buy property, there were laws against selling them property, and certainly laws against worshiping in common. And yet the people at First United Methodist were courageous enough to let them buy that basement for their own worship service. And in 1859, when the members of that basement church decided that it was time to move out and get their own building, they moved to this location, and the United Methodist Church furnished them the very first minister. His name was Reverend J.C.T. Collins, a white minister, mind you, was the very first pastor of this church. And so this church brings a unique history, a unique culture, a uniqueness unparalleled, quite frankly, in the city of Memphis by other religious institutions.
I think a lot of Memphians tend to see Memphis as a majority black city, and they think that that's the way it's always been. But that's because they don't have a sense of history. And if you go back to, let's say, 1860, when the black population in Memphis was 17%, but that was not a huge population. That was maybe 4,000 people. And then the Civil War comes along, and because of the war that's raging around the city, and because Memphis is captured by the Union 1862, it becomes a magnet for escaping slaves, for African Americans who are just coming into the city, even free blacks who are coming into the city. By 1865, Memphis's black population has quadrupled. It's like over 16,000. And that's when you start to see Memphis getting a large population, so that by 1890, the black population is 40%. That's the beginning of this large African American population in Memphis.
During the Victorian era, these homes, which look empty to us now and sort of formal, actually were places where people lived and spent their lives. And we must remember that families at the time tended to be large. There were, in homes of this nature, quite a number of servants around, a lot of activity. People were getting up in the morning, starting their day's activities, interacting with one another. They would have been to, especially with children around, noisy places, places where people practiced their music, where people came in to visit with one another and have parties on social occasions, where elaborate food was served, where ordinary food was served also. In other words, all the activities of life and living, tradespeople delivering goods, and mail being brought, things were happening. It was a living entity. A great deal of life was going on around here.
But you could think maybe a few house servants, definitely a cook, maybe a cook's helper, definitely washerwomen. You know, I mean, I think we kind of underrate thinking about labor in the cities if we don't really think about the washerwomen, that every family, definitely every white family, many African American families who were, say, like the Hooks family or the Church family, that middling upper class elite, they would have had washerwomen. I mean, just look at the garments that you see on the mannequins in the house. You know, these things did not appear clean every day just because people said, oh, let's have clean clothes. These things had to be washed and they had to be hung out and dried, and no washing machines, no dryers. This was just all done by hand. And it was done by hand well into the 20th century.
We go in and we look at a room. In the 19th century, there was a very important table, and it was called a center table. And it was said that when the center tables started to go away in, I guess, the early part of the 20th century, that family values went down the drain. And it's because the family would come together, and I would imagine this was in the evening after dinner, and they would sit around this table, and the table was usually underneath the gasolier, a direct relationship. And they would read the Bible, they would play games, they would read together, and I guess talk over what went on that day.
It is our understanding that there were probably two very important people who did live in this house, and that would have been the nanny for the infant nursery upstairs, and probably the cook, because she had to get started pretty early in the morning. But yes, there was lots of activity in this house. I think when you think about the fact that there were 4 young adult children who first lived in this house, but the second family, the Fontaines, who lived in this house, raised 8 of 9 children. And I just love to go over and run my hand up and down that guardrail that's on the banister out there, because it's as smooth as it can be. And I think that many, many, many afternoons were spent with the children just being engrossed with that banister that's out there. It's a great testimony to its age, but also to its use with the children being here.
The Mallard Neely House, you really get the sense of the people who live there, particularly the wonderful.
Nicholas Pegues reporting. Prince Harry here in Memphis, Tennessee, and of course, Princess Beatrix, I am your elected American boyfriend, promoted on Facebook. Nicholas Pegues reporting. Here he comes. Prince William in Memphis. Right behind him, Nicholas Pegues reporting. CNN icon of Memphis. There he is. Nicholas Pegues reporting. Princess Beatrix is your elected American boyfriend. Documenting this. It was Prince Harry. Awesome, awesome. Nicholas Pegues reporting. All right. And here we are in Memphis, Tennessee. Nicholas Pegues reporting, documenting Prince William and Prince Harry on Nicholas Pegues. God save the Queen. And Princess Beatrix, I am your elected American boyfriend. Only on Nicholas Pegues, CNN icon of Memphis. Excuse me. Nicholas Pegues reporting CNN I Report in Action News 5, and this is a letter I received from President Barack Obama that Commissioner Heidi Schaefer of Memphis and Shelby County will be reading out.
Dear Nicholas, thank you for your kind note. Your thoughtful words join a chorus of millions of Americans who are eager to lead our nation towards a brighter tomorrow. Each day, I'm inspired by the encouraging messages of hope and determination I've received from people across the country. With the magnitude of challenges we face, we will only overcome them if our imagination is joined to common purpose. The future we leave to our children and grandchildren will be determined by our willingness to shoulder each other's burdens, take great risks, and move forward as one people and one nation. With your help, we will build on what we have already achieved and lay a new foundation for real and lasting progress. And it's signed, sincerely, Barack Obama, President of the United States.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer, and I will work hard as a Unified School Board Commissioner.
Thank you.
Nicholas Pegues reporting here with Shelby County Commissioner Heidi Schaefer, and I received a booklet from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II regarding her Diamond Jubilee. And could you please express your support for Queen Elizabeth II regarding this booklet and her Diamond Jubilee? And could you please show to the international community what she extended to me, Commissioner Schaefer?
Well, I just thought this was very lovely. It's the program from her Diamond Jubilee, and you can see it's Elizabeth II, and I believe the R stands for Rex. She began her reign in 1952, and it shows that her Diamond Jubilee is in 2012. And if you open it up, you see her on her coronation day, and some pictures throughout the years. And there she is in her royal regalia. And it's from Buckingham Palace, and it says, "I send you my grateful thanks for the words of support which you have so kindly sent on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of my accession to the throne. Elizabeth, 2012.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Heidi Schaefer. And, it was a complete honor to receive this from Queen Elizabeth II, and it was just amazing to me. So, as the youngest Shelby County Unified School Board applicant, I'm just honored, and I will continue to fight and help my generation to be inspired in public service.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. And happy 2012 Diamond Jubilee to Her Majesty.